Welcome back my dear students, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is the TQM 1 lecture series and this is the last one, which is the 40th one and the last in the 8th week. As you know, this is the 8th week series of lectures. I am Raghunandan Sengupta from the IME department, IIT Kanpur. And if you remember, we are discussing for the last 3 lectures Kusum charts and exponential moving average charts. Then later on we considered the exponential moving concepts related to the variability also, where the square was taken, and also the same concept was used typically each time, that you will give the weights of lambda to the present weight and 1 minus lambda to past data. So, depending on lambda being high and low, the trend would basically be coming out very fast or very slow, and obviously you have to take corrective actions accordingly. Then you can combine the exponential moving weighted method also with the Shewhart charts, considering that you want to have both the feedback for large shifts and small shift, and be aware of the shifts with almost same level of importance. And then we considered that and obviously this was a this is in a way the concept which we had already discussed in Kusum charts, where the weights could also be analyzed. Weights means the combination of Shewhart charts and Kusum charts, they could be done in this way. So, continuing in the last lecture. So, the moving average control charts, both the Kusum and the EWMA are time weighted controls, because the time weights coming with respect to the ith reading which you are taking. The EWMA charts use a weighted average as the chart statistics. Occasionally another type of time weighting controls could also be used, which are simply unweighted moving average. So, in case say for example, the data points are x1 to xn, then the moving average span, which is for time period t, would basically be found out by finding out the sum of the weights divided by the number of such observation which you have. And time period I, the oldest observation in the moving average is dropped and the newest one is added. So, obviously the weights would be shifted accordingly, and you can find out the weights as we mentioned. So, if you remember, if I want to give more weights, less weights to the present and past data, so obviously that would depend on the lambda value. So, lambda value would basically be a sense of control parameter which will dictate to what level of significance you would like to give for the just previous data or the past data which are around about 3 or 4 time periods back, what is the level of importance you are trying to assign to them. Therefore, if say for example, for these methods mu naught or mu hat denotes the target values. So, obviously you can find the upper control and lower control values accordingly. Here also it again the central limit theorem comes into play. The upper control would be mu plus and lower control would be mu minus. So, the plus and minus values would be 3, which is the factor, because I am trying to take about 99% confidence, and the these 3 factor would be multiplied by the value of the standard deviation divided by technically W. W, if you remember, is basically n, number of readings. So, obviously it is exactly similar to the concept which you have considered earlier in the central limit theorem case, where the plus and minus values with respect to the upper control and the lower control would be basically be the value of k being the value of 1, 2, 3, depending on what is the level of dispersion which you have, and this sigma by square root of n is exactly what it is given here by sigma by square root of w. So, there is a 1-to-1 simply between them. Consider an example. You have the same data starting from the sample 1 to 30, xi values are given, you find out the moving average is you want to find out, and considering the target value is 10, you find out the weighted first the difference between xi minus 10, then basically you find out the sum of the difference between xi minus 10, and then you add up, which is given in the last column, which is the 4th column. The observations xi for the TED periods of 1 to 30 are shown. For periods the statistics is plotted basically for 5 time periods, basically find out the weights and calculate accordingly. So, if you find out the observations, again 1 to 15 is given in the first column, xi values from 9.45 to 10.08 is given in the second column, and the weights m value, which is the so called weighted average you are trying to find out, giving the weights as 1:5. 1:5 in the sense that the probabilities of each weights weighing on trying to find out the average weights is basically 1/5, which is 20%. So, it can be done accordingly also. If you have 4 values, it will be 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, which is 25%. If it is 1/3, obviously it will be 33.33 weightages you are trying to give on the concept of the probability. This has nothing to do with the value of lambda. For the time periods of I less than 5, the average observations for the time period 1 to I is plotted, and the values of these moving averages are basically shown in the table 9.14. So, once you find out the upper control and the lower control, considering the mean value as 10, so the upper control comes out to be 11.34 and lower control comes out to be 8.66, which means that you are slowly giving the weights in such a way that they asymptotically become a straight line parallel to the central line, as we did for the exponential moving average. Here, rather than using the exponentials, we are basically trying to utilize the concept of the weights in such a way that these weights slowly taper out or tamper out the fluctuations and they make them parallel. So, it's rather than in the exponential case we had this, and in this case they are basically the weights depending on 5 such readings. So, they basically become straight lines, and then you can plot the points which are shown here, and then you can predict how the overall process is either out of control or in control. Now, we will be considering the general benchmarking process for total quality control. Benchmarking is the process of comparing and measuring an organization's operations or its internal process against those of best in class which are available. Finding the secrets of success of any given function or process, so that the company can learn from the information, is very important, and it needs to improve that also. Benchmarking is a tool to help establish where improvement resources should be allocated. For example, it is discovered that 3 out of the 5 processes are nearly as good as the best in class performers, but 2 are significantly off the best track, then the most resources should be allocated in these 2 in order to basically find out the actual reasons and causes for that. Benchmarking is done between consenting companies, so that may or may not be competitors. So, obviously, when you want to benchmark, you should basically find out in the same sector, same type of economy, where you are functioning, what is your market share, what type of different market sphere you are operating, what are different type of products you are trying to basically manufacture and sell, who are the different type of service sectors you are in. So, say for example, somebody Flipkart is trying to analyze its process capability. So, obviously, its benchmarker would be Amazon, or Amazon will do it with, say for example, Flipkart. If you are basically trying to compare Tata Motors, it will do with Mahindra, Maruti, or Maruti will do with Mahindra, Ashok Leyland, Tata, and so on and so forth. If you are trying to basically compare the airlines, India Airlines versus Indigo versus Jet Air and all these combinations, so it can be done in a very simple way. So, the examples which I gave are just the benchmarking concept, but whether they would be applicable in the quality control sense, you have to basically analyze them from the core perspective. So, these were just an idea how the benchmarking could be done with examples. Benchmark is done between consenting companies that may or may not be competitors. As I mentioned, benchmarking is equally beneficial for both large and small business. Why? And then the question comes, why do we need benchmarking? The rationale for benchmarking is that it makes no sense to stay locked in an isolated laboratory trying to invent a new process that will improve the product or reduce the cost when the process already exists. So, if you are trying to reinvent the wheel, be careful, because it is of no use. It is already available in the market, and people would not be interested to use that. If one company has a process that is 4 times as efficient, the logical thing for other companies to do is to basically adopt that process rather than reinvent the wheel. An organization can make incremental improvements to its process through continual improvement, but it might take years to make a 4 times improvement, and by then the competitor would have basically already progressed 6 times or 10 times more than that what the company has been able to achieve. Benchmarking is used to show which processes are candidates for continual improvements and which require major changes. Benchmarking offers the fastest route to significant performance increase and enhancement. To further discuss, benchmarking is the process of comparing and measuring an organization's operations or its internal process against those of a best in class performer from inside or outside its industry. Finding the secrets of success of any given function or process so that a company can learn from the information and improve on that is very important. Benchmark is a tool to help and establish where improvement resources and should be allocated, and if the improvements are there, obviously more allocations of resources should be utilized, because resources are limited. One should understand that. For example, it is discovered that 3 out of 5 processes are nearly as good as the best in class performance, but they are significantly of the best in class mark. The most resources should be allocated for these two. Benchmarking is done under the companies, as I mentioned. Okay, sorry for that. I just missed one or two slides. So benchmarking is used to show which processes are candidate for continual improvement and which is require major one-shot changes. Benchmarking offers the fastest route to significant performance improvement. Prerequisite of benchmarking is will and the commitment of the top management, whether they are willing to do. So, if the top management is willing to do, obviously they would be much more thrust in how the things can be implemented. There should be a vision, the strategic objective link should be there. Before benchmarking is started, its objective must be linked to the company's vision and strategic objective, providing specific direction and focus from the effort. Goal to become the best, not simply improve, is basically the main thrust area. Identifying key business processes, identifying the organization critical success factors. So, these are the handful of the characteristics, functions, capability or limitations that are critical to the success and the viability of the organization. One should identify the matrix for measuring CSFs, which is the critical success factors. These matrices are called key performance indicators and may include the production output and sales data and supporting management performance data as applicable. One should identify the process that derive the critical success factors. They will typically be 15 or more. So, obviously 15 is not a sacrosanct number, it can be more or less. Based on that, somebody should work. Some of these processes may be grouped together and other ungrouped. If they are completely independent of each other, they can be analyzed and actions taken accordingly. These are your key business processes. It is for the list of the key business processes that you should select your candidate for the process benchmarking and work accordingly. So, one should understand the existing process, products, services, practices and customer needs. Process should be documented. Documenting of the process should be done in a very scientific manner. Process analysis skill should be there. People with skills to characterize the documents and the process should be hired, and they should do the work, and they should be done in a very scientific manner. Research, communication and team building skill should be there. That is, research is required to identify the best in class process owners. Communication and team buildings are required to carry out the benchmarking both on an internal basis along with the partners. Benchmarking approach and process should be done in such a way that they should obtain management commitment, baseline your own process capabilities. So, the process baseline documents the current process of the state of the process, its steps and capability, how it can be done. A baseline process will have complete documentation of inputs and outputs. This is often called process characterization, and process flow diagrams are a key element of trying to understand and do the baselining process. In step 3, one should identify and the document and which are both strong and weak processes, select processes to be benchmarked and take actions accordingly, form benchmarking teams. So, this would include people who operate the process, those who have input to the process and those who will take input and basically try to implement that accordingly. In step 6, research in the best classes are done. You should basically take examples from them, implement them accordingly and take how they are trying to implement that. So, if I am trying to implement some process capability or in the manufacturing sector, then obviously in India one would be interested to implement the process capability and the manufacturing capability of Sundaram Fasteners, because they are a world leader who have done a lot of work in quality control. So, obviously those should be done, and in some point of time Tata Motors also did a lot of work related to the quality control on the shop floors in Jamshedpur plant. So, obviously that can also be taken into consideration. So, these are very simple examples. There would also be much more examples which you are all aware, and you can consider those as best fit for the point which I was discussing. Select candidates which are best in class benchmarking practices, partners and the example should be taken in such a way that you can follow them. Form agreements with benchmarking partners and implement them accordingly. You should collect data. So, the team has already agreed to discuss a specific process or processes, observe, collect and document everything, and you should do in such a way that you do that scientific process control and data collection should be utilized. You should analyze the data, establish the gap. The team must analyze them thoroughly in comparison with the data taken from own process. In most cases, the team will be able to establish the high performance gap, the performance difference between the two processes, and numerically correct that. For example, 200 pieces per hour versus 110 pieces, or there are basically 2% scrap versus 20% scrap concept. So, they should be considered in a scientific manner such that you can analyze the data and basically come up with solutions as needed. In step 11, plan action to close the gap or surpass it. Implement will require some planning to minimize the disruptions while the change is being made and while the operations are getting used to the new operations. So, obviously, they should be processed to close the gap and try to surpass that. In the 12th state, basically is initial performance may follow below the benchmark. After people get used to the changes, the initial process problems get worked out, performance should be close to the benchmark. So, this is basically the implement and change the process as the process progresses. In step 13, you monitor the results. In step 14, you update benchmarks, and the continue the process and do it in a loop wise and cycle wise as the input for stage 2 would basically be the output for stage 1 and continuous improvement is being done. So, as discussed, the complete cycle would be the obtain the management commitment, which is, if you remember, this is the top priority. Once that is done, other things would definitely move in the positive direction. Baseline your own process, identify strong and weak points, select process to be benchmarked, form the benchmarking team, do the research, select benchmarking partners, form agreements, collect benchmarking data, analyze the data, plan action, implement change, monitor performance, update the baseline, and once the feedback goes, it goes to the top to the baseline your process. So, that means you process accordingly and improve accordingly. So, there would be the 3 stages: actions to be taken by the management, by the process engineers, by the teams with the partners and the management. So, they would collectively be considering all these things at one go or different stages of the problems, how the complete cycle is being analyzed. In implementation of the TQM, there are 3 phases process. So, one is basically step 1 to step 2, this is the preparation phase, 12 to 15 is the planning phase and 16 to 20 is the execution phase. Each step has fixed action points and based on the outputs, the actions are taken accordingly. The implementation steps are basically step 1, the top executive must make the commitment. Formation of the total quality steering committee is to be formed by the top management. The steering committee team building is done, which is step 3. I am not going through the details, I am just basically mentioning the main points. In step 4, the steering committee's total quality training is basically the main emphasis, where action is taken related to training and quality philosophy. Then in step 5, creation of the vision statement. So, the objective is to get the steering committee thoughts, refine the language and conclude with short meaningful documents which is easily implementable and easily understood. Establish a broad strategies and objectives. Have a vision statement which can be which is very objective and can be implemented accordingly. Communicate to the public, make sure that everyone in the organization is aware of what is the actual commitment level of the top management is. In step 8, identify the organization's strengths and weaknesses. In step 9, identify the advocates and who are the registers. Then baseline employee satisfaction and attitude, which would be step 10. Then baseline customer satisfaction, who are also a part and parcel of the overall cycle, which is step 11. Then plan and the implementation approach and use the plan do check process, which would be step 12, and basically the work would continue. In 13 and 14, it would be identification of projects and establish team composition. In 15, it would be provide team training. 16 would be team activation and direction should be given to this team in which way they are going to work. In 17 it would be team feedback loop to the steering committee, 18 would be customer satisfaction and feedback loop which is there. In 19 would be employee satisfaction and feedback loop which is important, and in step 20 it would be modifying the structure as necessary for implementation of the work as required. So, with this I will end this TQM 1 lecture series, and I will just summarize them as it is required, even though we had covered a vast area or swath of concepts. But the main concept which I think is very important is basically, apart from the conceptually be implemented, would be obviously there should be a philosophical change in how you implement the work. But the main emphasis is that you should be aware of how the mathematical tools should be applied. So, once you see the data, read the data, understand that there is some problem or whether the problem has to be monitored, then you can use different type of X bar charts, R charts, P charts, NP charts, C charts, the exponential moving charts, COSUM charts, try to understand what is the alpha and beta level of risk, the customer satisfaction, the vendor satisfaction, the risk which I did mention would basically of type 1 and type 2 errors, they would come into the picture. You will have the OC curves. OC curves is the with the operating characteristics curves would give you the level of satisfaction based on the different type of distribution you will use. It will depend on the number of samples you are trying to utilize, and so on and so forth. So, obviously, once somebody is very well aware of the statistical methods, then overall implementation of the philosophy, considering the way how it should be implemented, how the house of quality should be done, all these things would be on a philosophical term. So, once the overall philosophy of that you have to improve the quality, that has to be done, if that is implemented, then all the process would be coming into the picture. So, obviously, to wrap it up, that we have covered the overall concepts of TQM1 with some examples which some problems solved, and obviously you have taken assignments, taken the assignments for each and every classes which had been done. Obviously, you will take the examination also. I am sure the overall learning process has been positive on your end, at your end, and as it has been very fulfilling at my end and with my TAs, such that the overall feedback, if you are able to give to us, to me and to my TA, Mr. Somnath Bhattacharya, who has been very helpful in trying to help me out in all these courses. It has been really a truly brilliant and a very fulfilling experience both for him as for me in trying to basically come up to the NPTEL MOOC and deliver the lectures to all of you all. Have a very nice day, and thank you all for your attention. I am sure all of you will do very well in your life. Thank you very much.